What if everything you built with your bare hands could be taken from you by the one person you trusted to protect it? She didn't start with privilege, nor did she inherit opportunity. What she had at the beginning was hunger, sharp, unrelenting and disciplined. Hunger to prove that she was more than her background, more than the room she wasn't invited into, more than the doors slammed shut in her face. While others relied on legacy, she relied on endurance. Hi family, I need you to please help subscribe and watch my video to the end. Please remember to subscribe to my channel. Let us continue. Her empire was not an accident. It began as a fragile idea scribbled in notebooks during sleepless nights. She studied markets the way others studied scripture, memorizing patterns, predicting shifts, understanding people before they understood themselves. Failure visited her often in those early years, missed deals, betrayed partnerships, near bankruptcy, but she learned something powerful each time she fell. Resilience compounds faster than money. When her brand finally broke through, it did so violently. Overnight success, they called it. They never saw the decade of sacrifice that preceded it. They never saw the years she spent choosing growth over comfort, strategy over sentiment, survival over approval. She built a company that redefined luxury, clean, bold, intentional. It wasn't just profitable, it was respected. Industry leaders began to quote her insights. Investors chased her instead of the other way around. Governments sought her opinion. She became a woman whose presence shifted rooms. And she remained fiercely independent. Ownership mattered to her. Control mattered. She structured her company with precision, protecting it from hostile takeovers and predatory interests. Every clause, every signature, every safeguard existed for a reason. Her empire was an extension of her mind, calculated, protected, and deeply personal. Yet, for all her brilliance in business, she longed for something she could not engineer: love. She met him at a private economic summit, far removed from cameras and public performance. He was already a billionaire, old money expanded through new ventures. Smooth, composed, and dangerously observant. Where others were intimidated by her intellect, he seemed drawn to it. He listened when she spoke, not with the impatience of men used to being obeyed, but with interest that felt validating. He told her she inspired him. He told her she was rare. He told her she didn't have to carry the world alone anymore. And against her better judgment, she let herself believe him. Their relationship unfolded carefully at first. Discretion mattered to her. Trust took time. But he was persistent without being aggressive, patient without being passive. He never rushed her, never demanded space in her life. He simply made room for himself until it felt natural. When she was with him, she didn't have to be on guard. She laughed more, rested more, dreamed differently. The world watched closely when they finally went public. Headlines crowned them a power couple before they had even defined themselves. Analysts speculated about mergers, influence, dominance. She dismissed the noise. This wasn't strategy, she told herself. This was personal. He proposed beneath the glow of certainty, promises woven into polished words. He spoke of partnership, equality, legacy. He spoke of protecting what she built, of standing beside her, never over her. She said yes. The wedding was elegant and controlled, nothing excessive, nothing careless. She refused to turn love into spectacle. Still the elite gathered. Cameras flashed. Glasses raised. It looked like victory. But even on that day, subtle cracks appeared. His children attended with rehearsed smiles and distant eyes. They were polite but cold. Respectful but watchful. They never embraced her, never challenged her either. Just observed, as though measuring what her presence meant for their future. She noticed the tension. She chose peace instead of confrontation. After the marriage, she adjusted, not surrendered, parts of her life. She shared more. Explained more. Allowed him access to conversations she once kept private. Advisors warned her gently, but she brushed it off. This was marriage, not war. Trust had to exist somewhere. What she didn't realize was that love, to him, was never separate from power. He began asking questions, not aggressive ones, not threatening. Curious ones. Thoughtful ones. Questions about structure, about emergency authority, about what would happen if something happened to her. He framed it as concern, as foresight, as love. She answered honestly. She had nothing to hide. Behind her back, admiration slowly transformed into calculation. Her independence unsettled him more than he admitted. She didn't rely on his wealth. Didn't bend to his influence. Didn't need his protection. And while he praised her strength publicly, privately it bruised his ego. His children fed that insecurity. They whispered about risk. About control. About how dangerous it was for their father to be tied to a woman whose power rivaled his own. They framed her empire as a liability, her autonomy as rebellion. And he listened. Gradually his involvement shifted. He wasn't just present, he was inserted. Meetings included him. Documents passed through his review. Decisions required discussion. He claimed it was unity. He claimed it was care. She felt the shift but not the threat. After all, she built an empire from nothing, and no one could take it from her. She didn't know that while she slept beside him, the man she loved was learning the exact architecture of her success, studying where it was strongest and where it could be dismantled. Because the most dangerous enemies don't attack you head-on. They marry you. How much of love is real when the world only sees what looks perfect? On the surface, their marriage was flawless. High society adored them. Magazines painted them as the ultimate power couple. Glamorous, intelligent, unstoppable. Every gala, every boardroom appearance, every private dinner photographed by the right people was curated to perfection. They smiled. They held hands. They whispered inside jokes that no outsider could understand. It looked like love.it looked like partnership.it looked like unity. But appearances are dangerous masks. And behind the smiles, a war quietly brewed. From the beginning she noticed small things. His eyes would linger a little too long on her decisions, not with admiration but calculation. He asked for opinions on her company's moves that she had made years before, suggesting minor tweaks, subtle doubts. Nothing overt, nothing threatening, just enough to make her question herself for a fleeting moment. The subtlety was intentional. His children were even worse. Polite, respectful, perfectly trained in manners but cold. They didn't hide their skepticism. She saw it in their side glances, the brief exchanges of smirks that passed between them when she wasn't looking. She knew they resented her, though she couldn't yet understand why. And her husband, he did nothing to stop them. Sometimes he subtly encouraged them. Not openly, but enough for the tension to thicken like fog in a winter morning. At first she dismissed it. She told herself that love requires patience and family takes time. She was a builder, she was strategic. She could handle this. But then cracks began to appear in more insidious ways. Meetings she once controlled began to include him as a participant, subtly pushing opinions that questioned her judgment. Legal advisors who had worked for her for years suddenly took his advice more seriously. Friends who had always praised her brilliance hesitated in her presence, unsure of how much to reveal now that he was watching. And the worst part? She didn't know whether she could trust herself to see clearly anymore. The seed of doubt he planted, careful, deliberate, was growing. Yet she still loved him. She wanted to believe he was on her side. She wanted to trust that the man who said he admired her strength wouldn't undermine it. The dinners were the worst. Publicly they laughed together, whispered compliments, posed perfectly for cameras. Behind closed doors, conversations felt like chess games she wasn't prepared to play. Every casual remark seemed loaded. Every compliment slightly edged with a question. Do you think you're making the right move with this partner? Are you sure your employees are loyal? You've always been so independent. What if someone takes advantage of that? Each comment alone was innocent. Together they were poison. She began noticing small manipulations. Documents missing pages, emails she swore she hadn't sent being forwarded. Advisors tiptoeing around her as if someone's shadow had grown over the office. She started checking her contracts twice, 3 times. But each time she did, nothing was wrong, at least not yet. It was an illusion of control. Her husband's charm never faltered. He smiled when he said something that made her question herself, as if he were testing her patience and skill. And she, ever analytical, tried to rationalize his behavior. Perhaps he's just trying to help, she told herself. Perhaps I'm overthinking it. But overthinking can be a survival instinct when the threat is invisible. The children watched everything. Every heated discussion disguised as strategy talk. Every tense negotiation. Every subtle shift in alliances within her team. They observed silently, waiting for cracks, for signs of weakness. Sometimes she caught them exchanging looks across the room, their eyes reflecting anticipation. Anticipation that she would stumble, that she would falter, that she would fail. The social appearances masked something darker, an invisible battlefield. Even love became a weapon. He would praise her publicly, then undermine her privately. He would smile in her presence while subtly instructing others to question her authority. He positioned himself as the mediator in conflicts he secretly fueled. And she, deeply in love, remained blind to the full extent of the manipulation. In quiet moments she felt it, a chill in her chest, a whisper of doubt that grew louder at night. The luxury apartment, the designer clothes, the champagne dinners, they were not proof of love. They were proof of appearances. Proof that everyone else saw what they wanted to see: perfection. But perfection is fragile. By the end of the first year of their marriage, she started realizing something terrifying. The world didn't matter as much as the people closest to her. And if she could not trust her partner, her husband, the one person who promised to protect her empire, then the foundations of her life were already compromised. Yet she clung to hope. Because love, even when clouded by deceit, has a way of convincing you that all will be well. And while she focused on keeping appearances intact, the real war was already underway, a war she couldn't yet see, a war being fought in silence, behind smiles, in whispered instructions and quiet manipulations. The marriage of appearances was perfect, too perfect. And perfection, she would one day learn, is often the most dangerous disguise of all. What if the person you trusted with your heart was the one plotting your destruction all along? She had begun to notice the subtle patterns, the meetings that ended with inexplicable delays, the contracts that seemed slightly altered, the quiet nods he gave behind her back. At first, she had brushed them off as coincidences or miscommunications. But the whispers in the office, the quick glances of his children, and the strange hesitation of her closest advisors told a different story. She was not paranoid. She was blind. The day it all came crashing down arrived with the quiet inevitability of a storm. The emails were precise, the legal documents flawless in their authority. Her empire, the company she had built from scratch, the product of sleepless nights, relentless planning, and sheer tenacity, had been sold. Not by a competitor. Not by an external threat. By him. Her husband. The realization hit her in the most unbearable way. She was betrayed by the man she had trusted above all others. Every ounce of love she had poured into their marriage, every compromise, every act of faith, it had been used against her. The headlines were cruel and immediate. Financial news channels reported the sale as though it were a strategic business move, but she knew the truth. It wasn't strategy, it was sabotage. He had used her trust, her love, and her transparency to dismantle everything she had built. She read the documents in disbelief, her fingers trembling as she traced every signature, every clause, every loophole that he had exploited. Every safeguard she had put in place had been quietly overridden, amended, or circumvented. It was meticulous, premeditated, and devastating. And then the divorce papers arrived. Like a punctuation mark on the annihilation of her life, they sat on her desk, cold, clinical, final. There were no apologies. No explanations. No warnings. Just the undeniable fact that the man she had loved, the man she had trusted, had not only destroyed her business but also abandoned the marriage they had vowed to honor. And the worst part? His children celebrated. She had expected some confrontation, some attempt at negotiation, some shred of decency. But instead, she walked into their home to find laughter, toasts, and to see her humiliation treated as entertainment. Her children, once strangers in their relationship, now complicit in the betrayal, applauded the downfall she had never anticipated. For a moment she felt the unbearable weight of despair. The house, the luxury, the life they had curated together, it all felt like a cruel stage. Each smile, each toast, each congratulatory remark from their peers became a dagger. She had been turned into a spectacle, her suffering used as amusement. The man who promised to protect her had weaponized her life for his advantage, and even the next generation was complicit. But amid the shock and despair, a spark ignited. A thought, sharp and dangerous, cut through the haze of grief. If they think this breaks me, they are wrong. She realized that despair was only the first stage. Anger was the next, and it was hotter, sharper, and more controlled. She didn't scream. She didn't shout. She didn't storm out like some dramatic figure from a poorly written movie. Instead, she watched. She studied. She catalogued. Every reaction, every mistake, every overconfidence from him and his children became data for her next move. This was not the end. This was the beginning of something far more potent. Her reputation, though tarnished in some circles, was intact where it mattered. In the network she had built, in the relationships she had nurtured, and in the secrets she had quietly secured long before she ever met him. She realized in that painful clarity that love had blinded her, but it had not destroyed her. Her intellect, her instincts, and her resilience remained untouched. The world might have believed the sale was the final act, but she knew the truth. She still held invisible keys, subtle leverage, and allies who respected her for her vision rather than her current circumstances. And with that realization came the coldest understanding of all. Revenge was not a whim. It was inevitable. Every smile he gave her from that day forward, every comment, every public display of success, would be a stage on which she would reclaim not only her empire but her dignity. She would not allow him, or his children, to celebrate her defeat without paying the price. She didn't cry that night. She didn't plead or negotiate. She planned. Because betrayal, she understood now, was only as permanent as one allowed it to be. And she had no intention of allowing it to remain permanent. The woman who built an empire was broken in one sense. She had lost everything she could touch. But in another, more vital sense, she had gained clarity, patience, and a terrifying edge. The ultimate betrayal had not destroyed her, it had awakened her. And the man who had once promised to protect her? He had just given her the perfect reason to strike back. The first act of her revenge was about to begin. The courtroom smelled of polished wood, expensive leather, and something far more sinister, triumph disguised as justice. She walked and dressed impeccably, her posture immaculate, every step measured, every eye tracing her with a mixture of awe and curiosity. She was still the woman who had built an empire, though it now felt like a ghost of her former power. Across the room he sat with a composed smile, his tie straight, hands folded, exuding confidence. Around him, his children whispered and laughed softly, leaning into each other as if rehearsing the punchlines of a cruel joke. To the outside world, it looked like the fair conclusion to a wealthy couple's private dispute. To her, it was a theater of humiliation, each cheer and chuckle aimed directly at her. Divorce papers, stacked neatly on the judge's desk, signaled the finality she hadn't wanted to face. The document was simple, clinical, void of warmth. There were clauses that stripped her of privileges she had assumed were untouchable, legal mechanisms she hadn't considered in her haste to trust. It was a cold, calculated dismantling of both her marriage and the illusion of partnership. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet, controlled, deliberate. She answered questions without hesitation, maintaining the air of grace she had perfected over years in boardrooms. But internally she felt the familiar coil of anger tightening, the same spark that had ignited the night she discovered her empire had been sold. The judge read aloud the terms, noting custody, property, and the distribution of remaining shared assets. His children listened as if they were spectators at a spectacle, a show they had long anticipated. Every clause, every ruling reinforced their perception that her life had crumbled. Every detail of the settlement seemed designed to humiliate, to remind her of the power they believed they had over her. But she was not naive anymore. She understood the game now. The smiles and polite applause from his side weren't victory, they were arrogance. They underestimated her. They thought her grief and outrage were signs of weakness. They didn't know she had already begun plotting, calculating, and waiting. Outside the courtroom, reporters snapped photos and scribbled notes. The world's attention focused not on the man who orchestrated the betrayal but on her, the woman left behind. They wanted drama, scandal, tears. They wanted the defeated, shivering figure they imagined in their minds. Instead, they found elegance, composure, and a quiet fire in her eyes. The paparazzi followed her every move, capturing images that portrayed the narrative he wanted to tell, the fall of a woman who had dared to love and trust. But beneath that perfectly calm exterior, a storm raged. Every glance, every whisper, every pointed laugh from his children added fuel to the fire that had begun the moment she realized the depth of their deceit. She left the courtroom with her head high, her movements deliberate. Outside, a small crowd had gathered, some recognizing her, some merely curious about the spectacle. She ignored them all. Her focus was singular, him. His smug smile, the confidence in his steps, the way he thought he had won. She filed the sight away in her mind, etching it with precision. Every moment of humiliation was a note in her strategy, a record of arrogance she intended to exploit. That night, alone in the apartment she once shared with him, she allowed herself a single moment of reflection. The grief and shock from the betrayal she had endured earlier in the year now transformed into something sharper. It was no longer despair, it was purpose. The divorce, the public humiliation, the children's applause at her suffering, the false sense of victory they had crafted, it all became the foundation for the plan she would execute. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't collapse into self-pity. She lit a single candle on the table, poured herself a glass of wine, and let the quiet darkness become a canvas for her revenge. Every legal loophole he had exploited, every assumption he had made about her weakness, every move he thought would leave her powerless, she catalogued them all in her mind. Because revenge is not impulsive. It is deliberate. It is patience multiplied by precision. By morning she had already begun the first steps. She contacted former allies, business partners, and trusted confidants who had remained loyal through the years. She reviewed every contract, every hidden clause, every confidential agreement she had once overlooked. The resources were still there, quietly waiting, and she knew how to awaken them. The world may have celebrated her downfall, the children may have toasted her humiliation, and he may have believed the battle was over. But she understood the cruel truth of power. Appearances can be deceiving, and the quietest person in the room is often the one who will strike the hardest. The divorce was served. The applause was heard. The empire was gone, or so they thought. And she smiled, not in despair but in calculation. The next act had begun, and it would be hers to direct. The world believed she was broken. After the divorce and the public spectacle of her empire being sold, everyone, friends, colleagues, media, even distant acquaintances, treated her like a shadow of the woman she had been. Invitations to high-profile events dwindled. Investors whispered, hesitant to associate with someone unstable after such a dramatic fall. Social media painted her as the cautionary tale of trust misplaced, love betrayed, and ambition undone. He had achieved exactly what he wanted. Or so he thought. Her husband strutted through society with a smug air, speaking in boardrooms as though he had dismantled not just her company, but her very identity. His children paraded their inherited sense of victory, enjoying every taunt, every public comment about her misfortune. To them, she had become nothing more than a story to gawk at, a fallen woman whose empire had been stolen with impunity. But appearances, she had learned, are dangerous illusions. She allowed herself the fall they expected. She walked with measured steps, appearing contemplative, defeated, even fragile. She smiled politely in the wrong moments, laughed quietly at jokes she didn't find funny, and never let her true intentions show. To the world she was diminished, to them she was prey. Yet beneath that calm, almost submissive exterior, her mind was sharp, calculating, and relentless. Every insult, every sly remark, every public toast celebrating her ruin was logged meticulously in her memory. Every overconfidence from her husband. Every arrogance from his children. Every misstep made by those who now thought she had nothing left to fight with. She was observing them all, like a predator studying the habits of its prey. She had lost her empire but not her allies. Quiet confidants, loyal friends, and former partners, people who had always respected her vision and intellect, still trusted her judgment. They whispered encouragement and insight, subtly reminding her that her influence was never entirely dependent on the titles she held or the money in her bank accounts. It was here, in this period of calculated obscurity, that she began to rebuild, not openly, not recklessly, but silently. She started small. Reconnecting with key partners, quietly investing in strategic ventures, and reclaiming influence in circles she had once dominated. She studied market trends with the same obsessive intensity she had shown years ago, noting weaknesses she could exploit, opportunities others had overlooked. Every action was deliberate, every word measured. Meanwhile, he and his children continued to bask in their illusion of triumph. They underestimated her because they mistook restraint for weakness. They assumed that a woman humiliated publicly and legally defeated would be too distracted by grief to fight back. They were wrong. She allowed herself one indulgence: reflection. Sitting alone in the quiet of her apartment, she let the memory of their betrayal, the laughter of his children, and the audacity of his confidence wash over her. Each memory was sharpened into a weapon. Each slight, each mockery, each condescending gesture became fuel for her strategy. By the time a month had passed, the first cracks in their arrogance had begun, small, almost imperceptible, but real. A careless remark here, an underestimated competitor there, a minor business error left unchecked. She observed, waiting for them to reveal their vulnerability. This was the beauty of patience. The longer she waited, the more confident they became. The louder they celebrated, the easier it would be to dismantle them when the time came. And she did not rush. Rushing was for the desperate. She was not desperate. She was strategic. Her fall, while real to the world, was temporary. They could enjoy their perceived victory all they wanted. Each cheer, each congratulation, each smug glance would later be their undoing. She would let them live in the illusion that they had won completely, savoring every moment of their arrogance so that when the reckoning came, it would be devastating. Because power, she knew, was not about wealth alone. It was about patience, knowledge, timing, and precision. And she had all four in abundance. The woman they had celebrated as defeated was already rising, silently, elegantly, and methodically. She was preparing for the moment when the tables would turn. And when that moment came, they would realize too late that the fall they had enjoyed so much was not the end, it was merely the beginning of their punishment. While the world believed she had been stripped of everything, she held one truth close to her chest, a secret so powerful it could undo every smug smile, every boastful glance, every false sense of triumph her husband and his children carried. From the very beginning she had never revealed everything about her empire. Yes, she had married openly, trusted openly, and shared portions of her life, but there were layers, hidden corners of her business that no one, not even her husband, had ever accessed. Contracts buried in private accounts, silent partners whose loyalty was absolute, financial threads carefully woven out of sight. These were her safety nets, the pieces of power she had never entrusted to anyone else. It had been instinct more than strategy. She had always known the world was cruel, that love could be deceptive, and that trust could be weaponized. She never expected betrayal, but she built as if it were inevitable, as if one day, someone would try to take from her what was hers. And now that day had come. The sale of her company, the divorce, the public humiliation, all of it played perfectly into their arrogance. They thought she was powerless. They thought she was finished. They celebrated openly, blind to the truth simmering beneath the surface. She had studied him, studied his children, studied every interaction and every assumption they had made. They had believed in the illusion of control, believing her fall was complete, her influence gone. But she had not lost. Not really. Her first step was subtle. Contacts in the industry who had once relied on her judgment began receiving anonymous tips and carefully timed information that hinted at her continued influence. Deals that seemed to favor her ex-husband and his ventures began to encounter inexplicable obstacles. Small but undeniable leaks, minor setbacks that made him tighten his grip on what he believed he controlled. Meanwhile, she quietly reclaimed parts of her old empire that had been overlooked. Hidden accounts, previously dormant partnerships, and confidential contracts came alive under her guidance. Assets he had assumed were lost forever were quietly being reintegrated into operations she now controlled from the shadows. Every action was deliberate, invisible, and perfectly timed. She smiled quietly when she thought of their reaction. He would never have imagined that she had kept these hidden reserves, that she had built an invisible network strong enough to outmaneuver him even without the public face of her company. His children, so sure of their victory, would not see the blow coming until it landed with devastating precision. And yet she exercised patience. She allowed him to continue his arrogance, to indulge in public displays of triumph. Every press release, every social event, every smug statement was catalogued and analyzed. She knew when to move, when to remain unseen, and when to strike. Timing was everything. The secret was more than just financial leverage. It was control over perception, over information, over alliances. She began to plant seeds subtly, leaking carefully curated pieces of information to allies, journalists, and competitors. She watched as whispers of doubt began to creep into his business circles, as his confidence wavered slightly, as the first cracks of arrogance appeared. And all the while, her ex-husband and his children remained blind. They believed in their victory because they could see it with their own eyes. They could not see what they could not touch. In private, she began to craft the plan for public exposure. She had accumulated enough leverage to not only reclaim her empire but also publicly reveal the depth of his betrayal, the manipulation, the exploitation, the calculated betrayal that had left her standing on the edge of ruin. The plan was precise. Every ally knew their role. Every secret was accounted for. Every move had been rehearsed mentally, anticipating every possible reaction. She would strike in a way that was undeniable, impossible to deny, and devastating to their sense of superiority. And yet she waited. Patience had become her greatest weapon. Each day he celebrated, each day his children laughed, was another day she sharpened her edge. The moment he believed she had no power was the moment she would remind him of the truth. Because the woman who had built an empire from nothing had never truly been powerless. She had just been waiting. Waiting for the perfect moment, waiting for the perfect advantage, waiting for the world, and the people who betrayed her, to finally witness the price of underestimating her. And when that moment came, the consequences would be absolute. The secret she had never given him was no longer just a safeguard. It was a weapon of justice, revenge, and reclamation. And she was ready. In the quiet of her reconstructed world, amidst whispered deals, hidden contracts, and carefully cultivated influence, she had thought she needed nothing, certainly not love. She had been betrayed, humiliated, and forced to rise from the ashes alone. She had convinced herself that attachment was a vulnerability she could no longer afford. And yet, love has a way of finding even the most guarded hearts. He appeared quietly, unannounced, unassuming, unlike anyone she had ever known. Not a billionaire, not a socialite, not someone dazzled by her fame or wealth. He was clever, kind, and steady, a stark contrast to the chaos of betrayal she had endured. He did not swoop in with grand declarations. He did not flinch at her shadowed past or her cautious heart. He simply noticed her, truly noticed her, in ways she had long forgotten someone could. At first she resisted. Trust had been shattered once. Could she allow herself to believe in something again? Could she open the door to vulnerability without fearing betrayal? He never rushed her. He listened when she spoke, asked thoughtful questions, and never judged her for the mistakes of her past or the pain etched into her expression. Slowly, subtly, she began to recognize a feeling she had buried beneath years of ambition and hurt: safety. A sense of being understood. While her public persona demanded strength, composure, and perfection, this new presence allowed her to breathe. She could laugh without calculation. She could speak without strategy. She could allow a fragment of herself to exist purely for herself, without performance. And yet, she never let her guard down completely. She had learned the hard way that love could be dangerous when wielded by the wrong person. But with him, the vulnerability was tempered by respect and patience. For the first time in years, she felt that the world was not just a battlefield, that not every relationship had hidden agendas, and that genuine affection could exist without exploitation. Amidst this quiet rebirth of emotion, her plans for revenge remained sharp and deliberate. Love did not soften her resolve, it strengthened it. He did not demand she abandon her empire or forget the injustices she had suffered. Instead, he anchored her, giving her the emotional clarity to execute her strategy with precision. Together, they moved through her network, assessing which moves could be executed without alerting her husband. She trusted him because he had earned it, not because she felt obliged, not because he wielded charm or wealth, but because he had consistently proven himself reliable in ways that mattered: discretion, insight, patience, and loyalty. He became more than love, he became a partner in rebuilding. Not a replacement for what she had lost, but a catalyst for what she could still achieve. With him by her side, she began to realize that her revenge would not merely be a return of power, it would be a reclamation of dignity, and the creation of a life untouchable by those who had once sought to destroy her. The dynamic between them was subtle. He challenged her when she was reckless, supported her when she doubted, and reminded her of her own brilliance when she forgot. Their interactions were measured, filled with quiet intimacy rather than overt dramatics. They understood one another without needing to fill silence with words. And in those silences she found strength, confidence, and renewed clarity. Her ex-husband and his children remained oblivious. They continued their arrogant celebrations, unaware that her support system had quietly grown stronger, that her allies were mobilizing, and that the woman they had assumed powerless was now more resilient and cunning than ever. Love, she realized, had returned not to weaken her, but to fortify her. It provided emotional armor, allowing her to approach her revenge not with desperation, but with calm, calculated precision. She no longer acted out of anger alone, she acted out of strategy, discipline, and unwavering purpose. And with that clarity she began planning the next moves in her ultimate play: subtle disruptions to their ventures, targeted exposure of their arrogance, and the slow dismantling of the very illusions they believed had granted them victory. Love had found her in the ruins, but it did not rebuild her. She rebuilt herself. He merely walked beside her as witness and ally, providing quiet support for the storm she was preparing. By the time her ex-husband realized that she was not only alive but stronger than ever, the shift would already be in motion. And when that day came, there would be no mercy, no negotiation, and no escape from the consequences of underestimating her. In the ashes of betrayal, she had discovered something unexpected. The right kind of love can sharpen rather than dull the edge of revenge. And with that love she was ready to rise. For months she had waited, quietly observing, calculating, and preparing. Every misstep he had made, every arrogance his children displayed, every assumption about her weakness, it had all been recorded, analyzed, and stored in the arsenal of her mind. The moment had come to act. The first cracks were subtle. Deals he had confidently signed without consulting her were delayed by unforeseen complications. Investors who had flocked to his ventures began asking questions, probing inconsistencies she had anticipated. Small whispers of doubt spread through his circles, quiet enough that he believed it to be coincidence, but loud enough that the foundation he had built on arrogance began to quiver. She did not rush. She did not flaunt her power publicly. Patience had taught her that true control is exercised silently, invisibly, and devastatingly. Every action she initiated was precise, calculated to maximize disruption without revealing her hand too early. Her ex-husband, blinded by his assumed victory, continued to act with reckless confidence. He laughed openly at minor setbacks, attributing them to bad luck rather than strategic interference. His children, emboldened by his apparent triumph, continued to gloat, flaunting the spoils of their perceived victory. Every miscalculation they made fed her advantage. And then came the first undeniable strike. Through hidden partners and carefully orchestrated alliances, she managed to redirect a critical deal his company had been relying on. A venture that was supposed to expand his wealth and influence suddenly collapsed due to technicalities, contractual clauses, and minor disruptions she had quietly arranged months earlier. To the outside world, it appeared like a business failure, but the architect of the disruption was clear only to her. The shock on his face was delicious in its subtlety. He could not understand how events, so carefully planned by her, could align against him with such precision. His children, still unaware of her involvement, scrambled to save face, offering half-hearted explanations, blaming market forces, luck, and timing. Every excuse was a testament to their arrogance, their belief that she was powerless. Meanwhile, she strengthened her own position. Assets she had quietly reclaimed were now generating tangible influence, giving her leverage she had deliberately hidden. Allies, once dormant, were now fully engaged, offering expertise, resources, and strategic support. She no longer needed to hide behind invisibility. Her power was re-emerging, but on her own terms, with full control over timing and impact. Her ex-husband attempted to confront her once, in a private setting, under the pretense of negotiation. He assumed fear, regret, or submission would color her response. Instead, she met his arrogance with calm observation, asking pointed questions that revealed not weakness, but mastery of the very systems he believed he controlled. The subtle realization in his eyes was everything, an acknowledgement, finally, that she was not the woman he had thought he crushed. The children's arrogance began to falter next. Deals they had thought untouchable began encountering obstacles she had orchestrated. Opportunities slipped from their grasp at critical moments. Their confidence, once so brazen, now wavered, as whispers of doubt from colleagues and partners began to infiltrate their carefully curated sense of superiority. With each passing day the momentum shifted. Every misstep, every arrogance, every assumption against her became a weapon in her growing advantage. She remained calm, poised, and deliberate, never showing the rush of satisfaction that she felt. The power of control, she had learned, was most potent when hidden, when slow, when the opposition could not perceive its source. By the end of the first quarter after she had started her maneuvering, the damage was undeniable. Projects that had seemed secure in his hands faltered. Partnerships that had relied on his influence were subtly redirected, leaving him scrambling to maintain credibility. Publicly he tried to appear composed, but in private his frustration grew. He had underestimated her patience, underestimated her cunning. She, on the other hand, thrived in silence. Every smile she gave, every interaction she engaged in with confidence, was a reminder that she was untouchable in ways they could not yet perceive. The empire he believed he had destroyed was being rebuilt, not visibly, not hastily, but with precision that ensured his eventual reckoning would be total. By the time the world began noticing minor disruptions in his ventures, she was already several steps ahead. She had anticipated every reaction, every overconfidence, every attempt to reclaim control. The tables had turned, and this time she was holding the map. Her patience, her hidden resources, and her unwavering focus had transformed what seemed like defeat into the most formidable advantage. The woman they had humiliated, mocked, and underestimated was now quietly orchestrating their unraveling. And when the moment came to reveal the full extent of her strategy, there would be no escape, no excuses, and no illusions left for him or his children. The tables had turned. And she had won the first round. The day the world finally saw the truth arrived with quiet inevitability. It wasn't an explosion of chaos, at least not immediately. It was far more precise, far more devastating. Every move she had made in the shadows, every deal quietly redirected, every hidden asset activated, every ally carefully positioned, culminated in a single moment that no one could ignore. She chose the stage meticulously. Not a courtroom, not a private meeting, but the public sphere where his arrogance had always thrived. The media, business circles, and social networks that had once celebrated her fall. Every report, every article, every whisper in the business world carried her calculated truth. The depth of his betrayal, the sale of her empire, and the subtle dismantling of his ventures she had orchestrated. At first, the reaction was disbelief. His confident public persona, polished through years of privilege, could not immediately reconcile with the reality emerging before him. Investors, partners, and journalists began questioning the stability of his ventures, uncovering patterns of failure he had never anticipated. Every discrepancy she had engineered or anticipated became magnified under the public eye, exposing not just incompetence but arrogance and misjudgment. His children, once gleeful in their celebration of her destruction, now faced the harsh glare of reality. Friends and colleagues who had admired their confidence now watched with suspicion. Partnerships they had assumed were secure faltered under scrutiny. Every victory they had taken for granted slipped further away, as subtle manipulations they had ignored became impossible to dismiss. The public, meanwhile, was captivated. Headlines shifted from gossip about a fallen socialite to detailed accounts of corporate sabotage, betrayal, and the reclamation of power. She became not just a woman scorned but a symbol of intelligence, resilience, and the consequences of underestimating someone who had been wronged. Through it all, she remained poised, almost serene. Every interview she granted, every statement she released was measured. She did not gloat. She did not scream. She did not appear desperate for vindication. Instead, she presented the facts with clarity and elegance, allowing the world to see the pattern he and his children had failed to anticipate. His public image crumbled first. The polished billionaire, confident and untouchable, was revealed to have manipulated, betrayed, and underestimated a woman he claimed to love. Colleagues began distancing themselves. Investors reconsidered ties. Business forums dissected his mistakes with a precision that mirrored her own planning. His arrogance had been laid bare, and with it, the illusion of control he had maintained for so long. Then came the children. Their casual boasting, once a source of amusement to them, became fodder for public scrutiny. Every project they had flaunted, every advantage they had assumed, came under question. Allies who had once whispered loyalty in their ears now hesitated, unsure of the stability of their family's influence. Confidence turned to doubt. Arrogance turned to fear.